Welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 169, season 4, episode 9. The holiday of Chanukah is upon us. Portion of the week this week read in synagogues around the world is the portion known as Vayeshev, as we shift from the story of Jacob into the story of Joseph. Our topic this week, inner strength. We have danced around this subject for many weeks here in the course of Coaching with the Bible. And it sort of showed its head this week in the sense that watching and being part of all the things that are going on here, particularly in Israel, but for our community around the world, there's sort of an inner resolve that is very palpable and very obvious and is very inspiring when you read about the strength of some of the hostages here. And you read some of the stories of the inner power of some of the heroes of the 7th of October, because there were heroes, people who saved communities, people who saved other people's lives, people who put themselves in danger to save others. When you read some of the stories of real valor and power and strength and courage of some who were killed here, you see more of that. When you see it now in the videos and the testimonies from the soldiers who are fighting, and you see what they're doing and how they're going about it and what it means for them, is, I think, very inspiring, very meaningful, very powerful, all at the same time. And so inner strength seems to me as a very powerful thing that's going on right now. And on the flip side, a lot of what you saw this week had to do, at least in the United States, with the sort of what we might call the moral corruption, or just sort of the bankruptcy, moral bankruptcy of university campuses, exemplified by the lack of leadership or moral clarity and moral corruption of the leaders of Harvard, Penn, and MIT. And there's all kinds of debates and things around the sides, but basically in a certain moment, that's when your inner fortitude needs to sort of pop out. And it didn't. So a day late and a dollar short with videos and statements afterward, you show up in those moments, and that comes from a certain place. So I was super curious, and I am still super curious about inner strength. Where does that come from? Because when you read the story in the portion about Joseph, extraordinary person. When you read the story of the holiday of Chanukah, the family of the Maccabees, Mattathias the father, Judah the leader, the inner will, the inner strength, the valor, the courage, power traits. And so when I thought about it and I started to think about it even more, you realize that there is an inner strength and that there are different versions and different kinds of inner strength that apply to a lot of people in this week's reading and to a lot of stories, and that it's not the same for really anybody. And so in reading some of the studies on in terms of building inner, not just inner character, more than inner character, that level of strength that comes from within, realize that some of it you're born with, most of it you're not. Most of it is developed, most of it is nurtured, most of it is experience. And so there is ample opportunity for each and every one of us to get stronger on the inside. Not worry, not think, not stress about what's going on around us, the fires or sort of the explosions or the messes that are going on around us, but for a moment to take the time, the opportunity to look within and to develop from within out. Inner strength. Take an example right off the bat from this week's portion. Joseph and his brothers do not get along. We know that. And then Joseph finds himself in a pit. And then he's sold down to Egypt. It's already harrowing. It's also already terrible. And at that moment, he really has the choice to disappear to history, never to be heard from again, or to persevere, right? So perseverance is an inner strength. Now, where does he get perseverance from? Talk about it in just a moment. But when you see it is, how do you show strength, or how do you show inner strength, or how do we learn inner strength? There's an example. Inner strength to persevere, to overcome. We shall overcome, right? We shall overcome. Joseph is ready to try and do his best to overcome. He might have thought that he was at rock bottom. Amazingly, being sold down to Egypt wasn't rock bottom. Because later on, he is then thrown back into a prison, and now it will appear he's at rock bottom. And yet there, he perseveres. Again, with the strength that he shows there, or at least the emotion that he shows there, isn't just perseverance, it's strength through empathy. By empathizing and connecting with the baker and the winemaker, another inner strength of his comes out and also helps to lead to his salvation. And so, dotted throughout the story are moments of inner fortitude, of inner power, and it's important for us to appreciate that those things can be developed. Positive psychologist, innovator Martin Seligman put together what I guess you would call the 24, I think it's 24 character strengths, right? And they are related to this idea of inner strength, because their character and what's going on the inside is very much about your character. And just like I've done in the other cases, in many other situations, they also had a survey, a poll that you could take, and I took one. It's called on the website, the Institute of Character website. So it's interesting to sort of see what jumps out for a person when they take the study, and which of the character strengths are there, which are the ones that have been nurtured and developed, and so on. But just appreciate that the idea that it is still possible always, always, always to get better at this. And while it is the truth that we all have vulnerabilities and we all have weaknesses, and that when we talk about this subject, more often than not, and when you ask the question or are asked the question, you simply more quickly and readily are able to pinpoint your weaknesses to the greatest level of detail, your inner weaknesses, where you crumble, which foods you can't stop yourself from eating, whatever they may be. On the flip side, the strengths, we get this idea, it's like a very global notion of strength. We need to pinpoint that and break it down too. And so when we say that a person is a strong person, that doesn't really mean anything. In the same way you say someone's a nice person, it doesn't mean anything. So strength as a term is a noun, and so it needs the descriptive attached to it. What's the strength? How does that person show strength? What are the things that might be considered a strength of character in an individual that I might want to emulate, that I might want to copy, that I might want to build and have a reservoir of for myself? And so we pointed to, from Joseph, the ability, the strength of perseverance, the strength to overcome, right? Relatedly, the sort of the strength to that sort of what you might call grit that Joseph has, that's inherited from his family. That strength of empathy. We might look at some of these kinds of inner strength determinants and ideas as soft, but I would call them soft skills, but not soft in the sense that they're not things that we should all have. They're important. Empathy is important. And so as I thought about it, it's just keep coming more and more and more of these strengths. And they're not just Joseph. Joseph has a number of them, but he's not all of them. And so you have a strength of, truth, right? Strength through truth. So the story in the portion of Judah and Tamar is a strength through truth, right? In the end, truth wins out. It's also a strength through justice, right? Justice wins out when she points out this belongs to the person who was with me, and then Judah stands up, right? There's a strength through failure there as well. He failed, he had a sort of a moral failing or an unwillingness to be open until the last moment, but there's a strength through repentance. And so it's important for us to appreciate that all of these things can be viewed as strengths, and we have to develop them and work on them and delve deeper into them from the space of strength. You can have, a strength through values, strength through moral clarity. Joseph shows it. His unwillingness to violate the relationship that his master Potiphar has with his wife is a strength through values. Joseph has a moral, ethical core that he's not willing to violate. You can talk about strength through faith. Joseph continually and consistently uses God's name in his conversations. That's a core element anchor of who he is. Now, when you pull back a bit and you zoom out and look as to where this comes from for Joseph, it clearly comes from his home. More than it is the case that a person is going to develop some of these inner strengths just roaming the world, it's modeled behavior that a person is particularly paying attention to. Right? So Joseph's first moments of strength, inner strength, of building inner character inside are the things that he witnesses in his home. Maybe initially it's the love that his father has for his mother. And at the same time, it's the difficulties that he has with his brothers. Or maybe it's the experience of having witnessed the family meet up with Laban on their way out, or the family meeting up with Esau on their way back. Or maybe it's in the moment of the reconnection between Isaac and Jacob that takes place in the prior portion last week. Maybe it's in the death of his mother, or having to figure out how to live life at such a young age without a mother. Having to develop relationships with the mothers of some of his brothers and to try to nurture from there. Or to have a younger brother who's also growing up without a mother. Or how to navigate in a household where there are so many people and so many personalities. And how do you find space when you're number 11 of 12 that comes from within? That's a development process. So at the same time that a lot of this is Joseph, some of it is Judah, some of it is Tamar, and some of it is Jacob himself. Jacob is unwilling to accept the loss of his son. He says he's going to mourn for the rest of his life. There's a strength in that. It might be on some level detrimental to Jacob in terms of an inability to move on or an unwillingness to move on. But there's also a sense of strength and an unyielding faith that there's something more here. And that what he noticed and saw in his child or in his children earlier on is not a mistake, that he had it right. That the time spent developing and cultivating and nurturing their personalities and their strengths that will lead to the 12 tribes was worth the effort and the faith that that's going to pay off in the end, even if for a moment one of those 12 is missing. He holds on to something. There's an inner power there. Jacob's perhaps is an ability to hold for extended periods of time. That's a strength of character is the ability to wait, and then get the payoff perhaps later on. The ability to withstand enormous pressure, enormous power from others, and to have that sense of what would be a delayed gratification years before he gets to marry the woman he wants to marry, years before she's able to have children, years before he's able to come home and resettle in his land, years before he can actually live peacefully with all of his children and grandchildren. That's a strength. And so development of inner strength, of inner power, enormously important. Amazed that it took us 169 weeks to get here, kind of thing, but okay, nonetheless it's there. And so now we have to sort of think about how do we go about for ourselves developing inner strengths like that. When we think about the story of the holiday, and we think about the household of the Maccabees, so what was that like? How does that work? What must that have been like? That kind of persecution, religious persecution, national persecution, or the idea that this sort of very small group of people is going to defeat this enormous power that controls the land, physically, emotionally, spiritually, in every possible way. It comes from within. You want to call it an inner belief? I'll take it. Inner belief is good. That's possible. So how do we do that, though, for ourselves? So I came across this newsletter. It's an email that somebody sends out. It's called Just One Thing. It's written by a gentleman by the name of Rick Hansen. I have no idea who Rick Hansen is, but it's super interesting. And so in an issue that he's talked about on inner strength, he talked about the idea that how does a person develop inner strength? And so it's a combination of appreciating, he says, issues and resources. The mixture of what's the issue, and then do I have the resources to deal with that issue? Right? That doesn't seem so complicated, but once you start to break that down and get it into its component parts, right, then you have to sort of figure out how do I get out of it. So the first thing to think about is, okay, let's think about what this thing is, right? If I'm going to think about an issue, we'll talk about the issue in just a second, I want to call upon my strengths that are going to be there for me. So he defines the different kinds of strengths that could be out there. You can go back to Seligman as well and sort of get through the 24 character strengths. But he talks about what are my capabilities? Right? So capabilities, I'm thinking about my emotional intelligence or how resilient I am. I'm thinking about my positive emotions. How much compassion do I have? How much love do I have? I'm talking about my attitude. Am I an open person? Am I closed? Am I going to be positive and maybe negative in the sense of how I'm going to sort of my outlook towards what's going on, right? So where am I going to be in terms of like how I incline towards certain things as they come up? Am I going to be gritty? Am I going to sort of be weak? Am I going to be a complainer? Right? What about my virtues in these spaces? Am I going to be generous if I need to be generous? Can I be courageous if necessary? Do I have the ability to be wise in a certain moment? So in all these different things, these are the things that my inner strengths. And the question is, do I have these in abundance within when something goes? And so I have to sort of work on it. And so he defines 4 questions that a person should be thinking about when they're trying to develop their inner strengths. Number 1, what's the issue? Right? So pick an issue. What's the issue? My job is terrible. Right? What's the issue? So let's say my job it's just not working for me. It's not going well. I'm not happy there. I need to get, you can go through it. Right? Fine. Now when we think about what the issue is, let's think about the issue all the way through. Where is it impacting my life? How's it impacting my life? What's it doing to me? What's it doing to others? Let's sort of, flesh that out. You see how this week we're sort of getting back to more of what we were doing for the first 150-something weeks. Question 1 is, what's the issue? Question number 2, what psychological resource, right, or what we'll call inner strength, if it were more present in my mind, would really help me with this issue? Such a huge question. So now that I'm trying to work through this issue, right? So my unhappiness at work or whatever it may be, or my inability to exercise on a consistent basis, okay, so what inner strength do I need to have? If I had more of it, would help me get through this, would make this better. We take that a step further, right? He asked the question, relatedly, what if I had it more as a child, or whenever this issue began to be an issue for me, would have made a big difference for me? So when we're trying to think about the psychological resource, right, the inner strength, so maybe it's hard for me to come up with at the moment, but if I'm going back to the beginning of it, what at that moment would have been good for me at that point? Is it a mentor? Is it a coach? Is it a friend? Is it, I don't know, a deeper relationship with, I don't know, a parent or a sibling, whatever it may be, right? And so, or take another one, another question that relates to that. Are there moments with this issue where this issue actually is better, where it doesn't bother me as much, it's not as deep, it's not as problematic? So what am I calling upon in that moment to get me to a better place in that moment? These are huge questions. We're able to answer that kind of a question. We're nearly halfway there. The third thing is then once we have those first two questions, what's the issue? Number two is what's the resource? Now we're going to ask ourselves, what experience could I have right now that could help me develop this inner strength, this inner resource for myself? And so he defines what he calls the heal process. And so the first one is to have, to have. What do I have to be able to begin to develop this inner resource? And then the last question that he asks, and the heal process is have, enrich, absorb, link. Have, enrich, absorb, link. And the fourth question, going back, is how could you help this experience of the inner strength really sink into you? So now that I might have had these experiences, and I know what the issue is, and I know what the resource is, how do I make it stick? Right? So I have to make it maybe an enriching, that's the E of the heal, an enriching experience. How do I absorb that? How does it become really closer to me? Right? And then how do I link that up to sort of become basically part of me? That it's no longer sort of outside and experiential and it's separate from me, but it becomes part and parcel of who I am and my inner being. And so this is that development process. Simple, I put that in quotes. So it's the heal process, have, enrich, absorb, link. And then this becomes sort of like your vitamin that you're using to develop yourself. When you go back to Joseph and to his brother, Judah, and to Tamar in that story, and to the father Jacob, and go back into the other pieces, you start to think about where did this come from? Like, where does that resolve come from? Where does the grit come from? Where does the entrepreneurial spirit come from for Abraham? In your own life, think about the things that you're strong at. When people ask you, what are your strengths? Don't say I can lift 200 pounds. It doesn't matter. It's, what are your strengths? What have you built up? What do you have reservoirs of? What do you have an endless amount of energy to do from within? It comes up from within. There's a ton of them. It's just a question of what the ones are for you. And then you realize that there's a resource for it, there's a source for it, it starts somewhere, it emanates from something, there's a start to what it is, and it's important that we begin to appreciate that the development of this thing, this will, this power that we have from within, is only what's going to make us better. It's only going to put us in a position to succeed the next time. Joseph has no idea that when he's sold down to Egypt, that his ability to get out of that first circumstance or to be strong in that first circumstance is going to get him to be strong in the second circumstance. He's working on it. He has to get through this one. The inner strength to get through this moment, which becomes sort of a next layer for him to get through the second moment, to get through the third moment, and then in the end to really look back at the whole thing and appreciate that he was sent rather than being sold, right? And so it's an important distinction. Same circumstances, but it's just a question of perspective there. Perspective is a strength. So what are the inner strengths that you're developing, that you're working, that you're courting to develop who you are, to make yourself better, to become a better leader, to become a better person, to become a better spouse, to become a better parent, whatever that may be. And let's end then with a quote like we always do. Here's the quote. This is an anonymous quote. I think it's a great one. Physical strength is measured by what we carry. Inner strength is measured by what we can bear. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Those of you celebrating the holiday this week, it's a holiday of Chanukah. Happy Chanukah to all of you. Everyone have a great week, a happy week, a successful week. Let's hope we can bring home all the hostages.